Thanks so much for making time to chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
I'd love to hear about your background and how you made your way to XR and yeah, just interested in how you
Yeah,
started making this game.
yeah. So I started making games in 2012 or 2011. I was working on this project called Batching. I was very interested in the idea of live lobby. So I had like a very small camera and like I attached my glasses. It was recording all the time. I generated this database of like virtual memories. And I had like an experimentation of like making a 3D virtual wall to create all these memories. And then people can use the game controller to go to different places and watch my virtual memories. That was my first game project in 2012. I love making games, window games, immersive installations, and stuff like that. So I've been pretty much focusing on window games, VR installations, sometimes game performances after 13 years. For this game, I've been working on it since 2018, all in all. And its concept has changed a lot over the past 7 years. I finally finished it in June 2025.
Okay.
It's the Rust Architecture project.
How did you get interested in games? Do you remember some of your earliest memories of playing games? When did it occur to you to start making them?
So now I work a lot of games, teach making games as well in Chicago when I was a teenager. I wasn't so much into games. Games are like TV, visual, all competition and distress me. I grew up in Hong Kong. After high, after school, like in middle school, high school, hanging out with friends, this game center in Hong Kong. And I don't enjoy playing that. I enjoy watching people play. So to me, it's almost like a cinematic experience. And one afternoon, I saw this teenage couple playing a racing arcade before driving his girlfriend's next to my own. And I was watching the screen, seeing this like virtual sunset in Tokyo. And that was inspiring because they were sitting in a way that's kind of like a real color. It's kind of funny. At the same time, they were not competing with computers, having players. They're just like hanging out. So that was kind of like an experience for me. That game can be beyond puzzles and stuff like that. It can be romantic, poetic, just a space for virtual romantic experience. And I think that inspired me a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that until watching films, I studied undergrad initially at the film undergrad. And I some similarity between film and games. Like games are kind of like cinematic as well. They don't focus a lot on the fun mechanic.
In terms of growing up in Hong Kong, what did gaming look like in that context? I know it's different from place to place. Was it computer cafes? Tell me a little bit about what the scene was like for you.
In Hong Kong, when I was growing up, while like computer games were like super popular, and, like our middle school, high school kids would hang out in the cafes after school. I also grew up in every era of like PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and stuff like that. And there were like a lot of pirate game stores in the city. As like a kid, there was this experience of like going to those stores and just on like the game covers, reading the descriptions. It was like a really enjoyable experience. You felt a lot of like imaginations about what these games are and what the game player is like, something like that. So with actually playing it, that was a really interesting experience for me. It's a very different experience from going to see right now and see trailers and stuff.
Were your parents interested in games? What did your parents do?
Yeah, so my mom is a banker. She's a very logical person. My dad is a romanticist. He teaches in high
Oh,
school.
okay.
He loves art. My mom is logical. As I grew up in that environment.
Classic, like left brain, right brain, it sounds like.
Yeah,
When did you leave Hong Kong or make your way to the US?
I grew up in Hong Kong. I spent 23 years there. And being my undergrad focusing on interactive art, I moved to Boston to MIT for grad school. I spent a couple of years there working with independent artists between Boston, New Orleans, and Hong Kong after finishing grad school. Around 2020, I moved back to Hong Kong. I spent some time with family, stuff like that. And then I moved to Chicago in 2024 to join School of Art Institute Chicago as a professor.
What part of Hong Kong did you grow up in? I've been once, but it was quite a long time ago.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I grew up on like a new territory side where eastern is called Fulton.
Okay.
Yeah, they're pretty interesting neighborhood. Like one side is all residential, and the other side is all taxi buildings, like kind of like loft, and artist studios and so on. I grew up in every residential.
Oh, is that across with the ferry, like across from the Star Ferry, like from the main downtown area?
It's kind of like the suburbs. Yeah, like it's very side more like downtown, on Long Island, Kowloon.
Yeah.
Which area were you in?
I'd have to look at a map. Hold on. I went in 2019. Actually, not that long before you came back. Let's see.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I stayed. I'm looking at the train line because I'm trying to remember which end of the island I stayed on. Yes, I stayed on one side.
Cool.
Yeah, towards Kennedy Town, I guess was the name of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so, right, I got to stay in one of the the high rises or whatever, those pencil sized
Yeah, yeah.
skyscrapers. And then I got over to the Kowloon side. And I did one day on the south side. I took a bus to go to the beach. I had a really good time. I lived in New York for many years. At that point, Hong Kong shares a lot of similarities in terms of the density. But the relationship to nature was always super interesting to me about Hong Kong. Now living in Los Angeles, LA is more spread out, but is much more in dialogue with the mountains that are here. And Hong Kong kind of felt that way. We have this city that's pushed up against. I took a hike to, what is the name of that peak that overlooks it? There's a shuttle that goes to the top.
Oh, yeah.
Victoria Peak.
Yeah.
I hiked up there on this green trail section. It was strange to be in nature, kind of like in and out of sky rises, and then in and out of like sky rises, and then like getting to a mall at the very top at the tram station. The urban geography of Hong Kong was super interesting to me as a visitor.
It's extremely urban. But I think like a big portion of the city of country parks, mountains, ocean.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
I wanted to talk to you about your game work, and specifically with Scent. What was the initial seed for Scent as a project?
Yeah, no budget. It's the personal project.
Right.
The seed for that was initially, it's like a winding development. So like initially, 8 years ago, my dad had some problems with his eyes. And the doctor said that his field of vision is going to shrink over time.
Okay.
And then eventually he would become blind. At that time, I was reading a lot about computer vision. There's this emotion aspect of glory, losing vision. I was envisioning sort of like a sci-fi game that plays like a robotic doll. And then like there are like some conflicts within like the computer vision system, and the batteries, the cars, and the parts in the robot start failing, and then it gradually loses like a sensory systems and like a vision as a metaphor for how humans lose their physical function and stuff like that. So that was like the original idea. Okay, personal project and our experiments, the internet became a real animal adopt, and then seeing like the global situation. So it slowly became like seeing human brutality and violence from this perspective of like an animal. So there's no clear narrative about where this war is, what the geography is, who are these people, but it becomes like a sensory official experience witnessing human violence.
Yeah. Was there a particular conflict sparked this or got you thinking about this?
For me, this game is a fictional war.
Right.
It's a compilation of personal experiences, what I'm seeing from media and things like that. So I'm not referencing a specific war in the real war.
When did you start the project again? What was the first year you started?
He's 18.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like in the public imagination, like war and conflict, certainly with Ukraine and then in Gaza,
Yeah.
now in Sudan as well. I feel like in the news, we kind of go in and out of having warfare be part of the public consciousness and part of our public anxieties. And that's not always true. Certainly with the war in Ukraine, the concern is that it spills over and the genocide. In Gaza, I feel like there's much more imagery. It's much more top of mind. It's interesting you were working on this, but it's hard for me to ignore playing that game now in 2025. Even if that was not your intent, it definitely feels like a very present concern.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
I want to create a space for people to put in imaginations and relate to what they're experiencing.
Right. Yeah. At the same time, it's like if you had chosen a specific, like that's a weird thing because the documentary category doesn't exist in games, right? Like in film, you have fictional, narrative, nonfiction that might be set in a particular time and place. Or you might have straight documentary. And in games, you have almost neither. Neither are things set in real world environments, nor do we have the documentary as a form in games. I think it's interesting that you are in the position where players are projecting a certain level just because games currently don't provide that option.
It's very interesting whether this project is a game from an intellectual standpoint. I see it more as interactive cinematic series, like a game.
I'm not picky, I guess, in terms of I'm happy to have a more expansive category. Having lived through the game, not a game
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting to hear you say that some anxiety in terms of labeling something a game when you take it out to the public versus interactive experience.
Well, I don't have like anxieties, but it made me think more when I have my games like on the kids and the teenagers. Those questions come up a lot.
Hmm.
Ask me if it's like a slow game or like a calories and stuff like that. So like in the electro sphere, like people shows like many years ago, it's from the top 2 series.
Can you walk me through what the design was like, how you were trying to pace out the experience and what the prototyping experience was like for developing something like this on a rail with some interactive
Yeah,
elements? How did you go about
yeah,
thinking through what you wanted players to do when you were putting this together?
yeah. I there are a couple of things. I've been pretty interested in the years of cinematic games. But those games are usually very long. I've been curious about making short cinematic games as a format. I borrowed a lot of like, sensory language type of commercial games, like relatively high fidelity, like computer graphics, immersive spatial sound, and like occasionally cinematic action sequences, techniques like that. But at the same time, I use some commercial game languages that I do want to reject the reward system in my game design like that. Regarding the real like system, I think the whole concept of this project is about like your witness with their power. Like most commercial games, large games, and you have super abilities, and stuff like that. Like the open worlds, and you change the world in some ways. Like, for most of my games, that's for this game, the main character is very fragile, and you have their own great unlimited control over the fate. So I picked this kind of like an on the rail experience. You're still in this world, still kind of like an interrupted work. At the same time, you have very unlimited control over the past, and you are forced to witness things happening. I want to make it accessible to people. I feel like just some of my personal experience, like sometimes in galleries and stuff, like a lot of people, they just have to get used to a small controller. It's a very simple problem, like still exists. So I want to make like a world that can use of sheet keys and a bit like a mouse.
Yeah.
So to minimize on the learning curve, especially if the game is short, there is time that can necessary. So, and then for like, the visuals or the flow conceptually, I want to move from the human world to nature. Seeing humans like fighting against each other, like people slowly to animal world, to spirituality, physical survival, so nature and spirituality. That's like overall as well. And we have like a bit of like a stealth mechanic in the beginning that you want to survive, and then that mechanic like slowly disappears well. But then schedule cinematically like structured and developing like a long take.
Mm.
And you follow a back of things or when things happening around you. So like an interactive 360 video that you just walk around and witness and hide.
It starts with this moment of in and out of reality. It starts with this surrealist moment with the
Yes.
giant elephant emerging. Do you think of how much the characters are representational versus metaphorical? I'm just curious as you're thinking about, is there, I don't know, narrative or backstory for what's happening here? Because you provide so little, even if that's not
Yeah.
explicit, whether that is something that sort of informs how you want the work to be experienced.
So I trust the main character as a down because in this experience that you collected the suffering souls from that, the game provides no answer whether you're trying to bring them out of this world or like stuff like that. So for most of like, the experience, you're just trying to be with these souls. When you die, they're anxious because it was a shell like some, and then you're just like staying with them. So like the dog is kind of their companion into all these unsuffering souls and stuff like that. And then as you collect the souls near the end of the experience, they still got a range away by the ravens. There's like still more in nature.
Right.
So there's a part of the ravens scene. And the elephant to me is just like a symbol of wisdom and spirituality as well. So it's kind of like the game offers no answer to how to end lives, but you have like hope and you want to find an answer in the dream of an elephant. So elephant sleeps.
Yeah. That's an interesting point about not to anthropomorphize too much. The animal creatures themselves are in a combative they themselves are also locked in some type of the conflict of nature is just as inscrutable to us as conflict between humans is to animals. So it's interesting to see that kind of like full circle. The other part I thought was interesting was the decision to have so much of the like the violence happen, kind of like off screen. You're often coming across humans who are suffering or there are gunshots in the distance, but so much of it's implied in terms of what's happening in that sequence. Obviously, we come across the mass grave. There's all of those souls together. There is a horror that is games tend to not be a very subtle art form. So I was curious about your decision to have so much of that not be seen. Actually, it made me think of a zone of interest, where there's so much violence happening off screen because the horrors of the Holocaust, so you don't need to showcase it in an explicit way. I was curious about the decision to place the violence in the background for players.
Yeah, I think like in chaotic situations, I feel like we don't have a clear sense when it's happening. There's a lot that happens in the air, and you hear the sound or something. I was trying to create this sensory and visual experience of being in like a very chaotic situation, and there's predictable sound and like things like that. And I think that would create a more intense psychological experience than like showing other people die in front of you, like visual. And then also in terms of sound, I'm very interested in the idea of immersion. I did a lot back in grad school, but now I'm interested in using my simple artificial language to convey that as the dog is walking grass and how the body generates like sound at the grass, things like that. I learned several elements here create that immersion and psychological impact. That's one I've trained.
That's interesting. For your students, is there anything that that you learned from developing the game you're now trying to pass along to your students?
I'm learning a lot to my students. I have one of my grad students like playing their game, and one of his feedback, because it's a linear experience in terms of game programming, we use trigger boxes in the game. So which means like if the dog walk into this little box, it would trigger that soldier to come here and then fire gunshots. And so, and then if you don't step into this box, nothing will happen. This trigger box is serious. Like if you go to like a amusement park, you go to like a town amusement parks, they have sensors that trigger lights. One of my students' feedback is they don't want to start the game because if you don't step into these boxes, the war will probably not happen. Like that. So like I'm kind of like intrigued. I'm also intrigued by the way that they think about how this kind of system works and how they correlate different concepts with home. Because if you don't start this game, it's fictional virtual world. I find that philosophically pretty interesting. For teaching about games, my students know a lot about new games. We spend a lot of time playing new games in class. At the first hour, it's always like how we pass around a new controller, and we like play and talk. And we do picnics and stuff like that. So yeah, teaching is kind of fun.
Yeah, I'm sure for students, they come to class with a very people, when students take film class or they take a painting class, they're learning as they go. It's like with games, students have spent so much time playing games, have maybe some very specific thoughts about how the medium is supposed to work in a way that is probably different. Like you don't come to film class being like, oh yeah, I finished the Sight and Sound 200. Like that's not really what happens. So it's interesting with games. There's a high literacy. In one sense, they spend a lot of time playing games, even if they haven't spent a lot of time thinking about games as a medium.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I know international students in China, they don't have a console culture. So the way that they interact with things are fairly different, depending on the culture.
Yeah.
And I think,
No, that's a good point. Thanks for sharing. I found the experience pretty moving. Games at different points in time have tried to experiment with showing the horrors of war. They struggle because there's typically an action environment. So they've often struggled with like showcasing that in a way because you get locked up in like having to pull players through with mechanics, and that leads you in a certain direction from a game design standpoint. So just stripping everything down and saying move through this space, I found that to be a pretty arresting approach to thinking about conflict.
Yeah.
Cool.